Live and direct, live and I take no jive.
Legalize it.
So how much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear. Koala bear. Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, great, Barry, a reefer.
Hi, and welcome back. It's another episode of the Karma Koala podcast. And today on the show, I've got South African academic Thato Lentsoe. He taught me how to say his name properly, so hopefully I have. And Thato is going to talk to us about cannabis and employment testing with relation to what is happening in South Africa, not very much, spoiler, and what he's doing to research that, so South African employers, governments, and other relevant parties can actually get a handle on this. There's not many countries in the world that are really paying much attention to this. So in the US you'll see a lot of it. In Canada you'll see a lot of it. In Australia you'll see a bit. Probably a bit in Germany now, but elsewhere very little. So Thato is going to take us through what he's found out in South Africa. Welcome to the show. Thanks for taking time to talk to the Karma Koala podcast.
Thank you very much, Sean. Okay, all right. So back in 2018, so before 2018, cannabis was not legal in South Africa. Okay, so in 2018, for the very first time, we had a constitutional court judgment in the case of Prince versus a Minister of Constitutional Development and Justice. So the court said for the very first time that certain provisions in legislation, such as the Medicines Act and the Drug Trafficking Act, these acts are unconstitutional because they do not allow people to smoke in private. And the court said that they are unconstitutional only to the extent that they do not allow people to smoke in private according to the constitutional right to privacy. So in any event, the court used the right to privacy as a license for people to smoke cannabis. But now the reality is that it's only applicable for private use and not public use. Everyone was happy with the judgment.
Just a quick, if I can just jump in. Prior to that case, what's the legal setup for drug testing and employment in South Africa? Because I presume, look, you've got a big mining industry. Everybody knows that. And you've got various other sort of extractive related businesses that are global. Was drug testing just left up to private companies to manage, or was there for train drivers or people in the public sector, did they by law have to be drug tested once a quarter or something?
Yeah, so the reality is that there were no proper procedures, the cutoff limits in terms of nanograms whatsoever. So everything was just done even after that case. Mm-hmm. So we don't have a proper system of drug testing at this, even currently, hence academics are starting to come forward to say, let's rather try to rationalize our drug testing system. So we don't have any, so we're just having a massive problem in our country.
So, I mean, you don't test for alcohol, you don't test for cocaine, you test for nothing, basically.
You would test, you would get tested, but in most cases, South African employers, companies, they mostly use urine testing, which is very problematic in terms of the window period. So people would get tested, they would get fired, but now the constitutional court judgment meant that now people could now smoke in private. Okay,
mm-hmm.
It was now allowed. So that was the biggest change. But now the biggest problem now is that since people are now allowed to smoke in private according to their right to privacy, right? Let me just draw a scenario. Let's say Sean works for a company, and then you then go home on a Friday night to smoke cannabis, which is allowed in private, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then 2 days later, you show up at work, okay? So let's say you get tested for whatever reason, okay? So based on the urine testing, the outcome would come back as positive. Now, the biggest question is, should you get dismissed? So remember, you have now your constitutional right to smoke in private, but now your employer has gotten you tested, and it's something that you tested like 2 days ago. It'll come out positive. So the problem is that when it comes to urine testing, it can actually show something that was taken 2 weeks prior or months ago. There's this problematic or fundamental flaw with the window period when it comes to detecting cannabis. So the question is, should you get dismissed? That was the biggest problem after 2018, because there's literally two competing interests. So on the one hand, employee has got the right to smoke in private. On the other hand, the employer or companies have got the right to ensure safety in the workplace through putting in place of drug testing. Very problematic. Unfortunately,
the conversation it's like driving, isn't it? It's all down to impairment and measuring what impairment is. A urine test can't measure impairment. It's pretty obvious to measure impairment with alcohol and other what I would term as class A drugs. So your cocaine, your heroin, your psychedelics, etc. But cannabis is far more problematic, as we know, and it stays in the blood system a lot longer, registering positive, but that doesn't have any relationship to defining what impairment is. So in your work, is that the core of what you're trying to define?
Definitely, yes, definitely. It's actually a point I'm getting to. So basically, people got dismissed. Okay, so if a person wants to go to work, you get tested, you're automatically dismissed, So the fundamental issue, people are getting tested without checking the level of impairment, without checking the amount of the THC in cannabis, as it is usually done with alcohol. So for the first time in 2023, the court said that our drug testing systems are irrational. So the court used the word discrimination, they're discriminatory. And I'm just going to highlight the issue of alcohol that you said. To discrimination, it came from the point that now, in as much as, let's say somebody, is driving at night, they are drunk, they're going to ask to get tested for alcohol using a breathalyzer, okay? Mm-hmm. You're not automatically going to be arrested by police officers. You'll only get arrested if the limits of alcohol or if the impairment is above the prescribed levels. But that's not the case when it comes to cannabis users. If you've smoked cannabis, the fact that it's positive, you are then fired. So discrimination comes from the fact that we are treating alcohol users and cannabis users differently, okay? While we check the cutoff limits for alcohol impairment, when it comes to cannabis, that's not done because our systems, our drug testing systems are not proper, they're not structured, we don't have any technologies or whatsoever. Okay, so, but this was the case of Innover versus World. It was a big judgment in 2023, basically a step into the right direction. But still, we do not have any rational drug testing systems. So very important, this then comes into my research now. I did a research. I looked at the United States of America. I could not really find solutions. I looked at Canadian law. I looked at New Zealand and Australia. And that's where I literally draw, important solutions from those jurisdictions. Okay, so firstly, Canadian law, what I did, I looked at all of these three countries to find or to come up with a robust solution.
Well, so meaning good luck with that.
So I looked at these countries collectively, because if we were to look at Canadian law in isolation, it does sort of give solutions, but not entirely. Okay. If I looked at all of these three countries together, it sort of gave me a direction or a proper basis for drug testing system. So first things first, in Canadian system, there's this principle called rationality. Okay, so before I get back to rationality, when it comes to South African workplace laws, before a person is dismissed for a misconduct of using cannabis or for testing positive, one of the questions or the requirements for a fair dismissal is that the workplace policy must be reasonable. Okay, if you're dismissed for an unreasonable policy, you can then say that the dismissal is unfair. But if you're dismissed for a reasonable workplace policy, we can then say it's fair.
And is reasonable, do we know if reasonable that's a pretty fuzzy word. So it's not defined under law, is it?
Definitely. So obviously reasonableness is divided into proportionality and rationality, but I look at rationality in this case. So how does rationality apply in the context of drug testing? So rationality means that the measure adopted must be rationally connected to the legitimate purpose. So in other words, the drug testing policy must be rationally be connected to its legitimate purpose of ensuring safety in the workplace. If there's no connection there, we can then say that the drug testing policy is irrational. How do I then apply rationality in the context of urine testing? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously we've discussed the fact that when it comes to urine testing, it can show past drug impairment. It's problematic. It's not easy to detect. It can show something that was taken 2 months ago, 3 weeks ago, whatever the case may be, and it's not fair to dismiss somebody for that. Okay, but the argument of rationality in this case is that urine testing is irrational because, it does not connect to its legitimate purpose of ensuring safety, mainly because it shows past drug impairment. So even though somebody's THC's levels do not affect their capacity to perform in the workplace, they are nevertheless fired at work, which is not rational. Okay, but when jumping, that's what happened in the Canadian system. That's how they said urine testing is irrational. But the courts in Canadian law, they go on to say that maybe we need to adopt saliva drug testing. But that's basically the end. So I did further research and I looked at, very importantly, I looked at Australia and New Zealand joint system. So there is like a code, a joint system of Australia and New Zealand. It would give us a guideline on how to test for cannabis. It would say, again, it would basically confirm what happened in Canadian law. So in Australia, the court said that urine testing is irrational, it's unjust, we can't use it. In fact, we must refer to saliva. But very importantly, the courts, even the court there said that even when we're using a reliable system such as saliva, which can show, something that was taken a few hours ago, it's much better. Even with saliva system, we still need to look at the cut-off limits, which is very difficult to analyze, to interpret. So urine testing shows something taken weeks ago. Saliva shows something that was taken a few hours ago, which is very good. But still, we need to look at the cut-off limits.
But they still can't. Yeah, and did they advise on making that definition? I mean, I presume that goes to the CSIRO in Australia. They're the people trying to develop the technology to try and understand it, but they're not there yet, are they?
So I'm just going to refer to the joint standard of Australia and New Zealand. So there's this definition of negative test. So it will say a negative test is when somebody tests below 50 nanograms if you're using a laboratory. Okay, so if you test below 50, have been verified by scientists, experts. It was in fact confirmed by the government. If somebody tests below 50 nanograms, they could be it's rational to say such a person is negative, right? But if somebody tests above 50 nanograms, we can in fact say that they're positive, so those numbers would ordinarily show something that was taken like 4 hours ago, which is quite reasonable to analyze cannabis impairment. So that's basically what the court said. In fact, in New Zealand, there is a testing product that actually aligns with those requirements, right? It's called the box of 25 saliva oral fluids test. It's like it's not too expensive. So in each box has 25 tests. it aligns with those joint standards. So if one was to use the system of Australia, New Zealand, plus their testing equipment technology, which was invented, it would actually give us, proper results compared to.
And that technology, is
urine
that
testing.
Is that New Zealand technology, or is it North American technology?
New Zealand. So in New
It
Zealand,
is.
yes. So New Zealand, they've started using this testing equipment. It grew and grew and grew. Yeah, it was it's a very good equipment. It was recommended.
That technology is still only used in New Zealand, I presume, yes?
Yes,
Okay.
definitely, yes.
Yeah, you've done the work in those former Commonwealth countries, so to speak, and they've defined some arguments under common law. And as you say, there's a level of technology in New Zealand that's fairly trustworthy. How do you apply that within the South African context? And listening to you talk, all the decisions are made and led by the courts, but not the provincial, state, or national governments. So, through your study, how do you think these rules can be applied, not just in South Africa, but in other countries? Do we have to wait for the courts to direct government to do something, or do you think government are actually interested in engaging with the issue and applying rules?
Yeah, no, good question. No, definitely, that's the point where I'm at now. So the point is to get the message across, not only in South Africa but globally, internationally. Right, that's the whole point. So first things first. South Africa, based on the history, inequalities, and just past laws, the issue of unemployment. In fact, South Africa is one of the highest unemployment rate. So seeing people getting dismissed, it's not a good thing in our country. So we need to basically get this message across. So first things first, one of the ways is to, work with the government, like the Department of Labor, or through companies, the HR policies. So the HR policies must then adopt or adjust these laws. So one of the ways would be amendment of the Labor Relations Act, or just to maybe add a code of good practice within the act. And I mean, one of the best ways, I think perhaps difficult to get across, is to amend legislation to put a code of good conduct into the Labor Relations Act, which is a very important legislation in South African employment law. So that would be the case, or just to put the message out there, or through, for example, organizations such as the Human Rights Commission, the Rastafarian community, and so forth. But the most important way would be working with the Department of Labor, with the executive, the government, the ministers, to adopt these standards. Because currently, as our country is at, we don't have any solutions whatsoever on how to test people for cannabis, to ensure that the rights of employers and employees are balanced in a very good way. Yeah.
And
proportionally, yes.
Do all these decisions have to come out of Pretoria? Do provincial governments, province governments, do they have any say in employment law, or that is a federal decision only?
Yeah, mostly it's like you'd have your national government, but you'd have your state organs.
Yeah.
So the most important thing would be state organs. As I said, yeah, like your Department of Health. I mean, not health, Department of Labor or Employment. So that would be a good platform to start or to touch base with, and getting the message across, and then national.
In terms of your research and other academics that you've spoken to and working with on this, do you think government in South Africa is aware of the issues and wants to engage with the private sector to create solutions for that issue?
Yeah, okay, to be quite honest, so back in 2023, the judgment of Enever versus Bachelor, the court said urine testing is irrational. In one of the paragraphs in the judgment, the court said that we need to develop drug testing systems that are rational. So it's basically an instruction of the judiciary.
Yeah.
But there's no sense of urgency from the side of the government to work on the issue. I don't feel any sense of urgency to find rational drug testing systems. You know, academics would be the starting point. You know, academics like myself, they would write articles, they would do research. But I think maybe there isn't enough, message getting across from the academics to the government.
I mean,
so
it
there's no
sounds,
sense of urgency. That's what.
yeah. It sounds to me that the best solution in South Africa, and I'm just sort of, thinking as I'm talking with you, because as you say, a lot of other jurisdictions haven't thought about this at all as well, is really an informal set of rules that maybe involve the academia, the courts, and the private sector, who can sort of have understandings that then drive central government to actually, get off their bums and do something. Does that seem to be the most obvious route to creating a level of equity within the system?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we need also that. So the issue is a bit of dialogue. There isn't social dialogue is not strong enough. Just to get the message across and to adopt valid rules and standards within the workplace. So maybe developing like a proper social dialogue across all these branches, the government, the employers, or perhaps NEDLAC or whatever the case may be. But we need something like that, definitely.
Look, on the same topic, but slightly differently, and obviously this is not your direct area of study, but does the same issue apply to driving in South Africa? And I mean, look, a lot of people driving trucks, so that's employment law, but also, private people in their own cars. I mean, where is South Africa on that? And from your knowledge, are the police checking a lot of people, not just for alcohol, but for cannabis with blood tests in South Africa at the moment? I mean, what's the state of discussion? And are too many people being caught in a net when there's no rules being applied?
Oh, good question, Sean. That's a very good question. I never really thought about it, but it's something that's very obvious. So in South Africa, you would never find a police officer testing somebody driving in a private car for cannabis. I've never heard of any situation like that.
Okay, that's interesting.
Or generally, cannabis testing, it's not common. It's really not common. I've never heard of anyone getting tested for cannabis. In fact, it's normally common in the workplace, where they're trying to ensure safety. But in terms of somebody driving, they would normally give you a breathalyzer for alcohol, not cannabis. But that's a very good question. Yes, definitely. Yeah, it's something which has to be looked at, actually. Are we perhaps working enough on cannabis, or are we just entirely focusing on alcohol? That's a very important point that you just mentioned, Sean.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's very interesting in Australia because they're very strong on alcohol testing, and as soon as the technology, however imperfect, arrived for cannabis and other drug testing, they've put it into play very quickly, but the rules haven't caught up with the police actively testing people. So that the conversation between a positive and impairment is a huge conversation in Australia at the moment, and really the same applies in the UK. And it all comes, it's a big discussion. So it's really interesting to know where and what other jurisdictions, especially in common law environments, are doing about this. So, it seems that South Africa is more interested in employment than driving at the moment, but really the two over a period of time will combine, won't they?
Yeah, definitely, yeah. And this also goes back to what the court said. The court itself, the latest very important Labour Court appeal decision of INER, the court said that treating alcohol users and cannabis users differently amounts to discrimination. And now you bring the issue of, testing alcohol users all the time, but not testing cannabis users. There's some level of discrimination in that regard, in the sense of differentiating between the two users. And that's a very valid point, very valid.
And that's a really specifically South African point because of the strength of your constitution. That doesn't apply in the UK. We don't have a constitution, and it's
Yes.
really interesting how you come to these problems in South Africa, because it's under fairness under the law is really important with your constitution, where those issues I know and may not apply in a range of other jurisdictions. So yeah, it's almost like you have the tools to solve these problems. Your courts want to, your employers want to. I would imagine if the police had the resources, they would want to. But it seems to me that, as always, Pretoria is the least interested in getting to the nub of the problem and trying to solve it.
Yes, definitely. So I like that. Obviously, UK constitution is unwritten. It's through customs, through treaties and conventions and all of that. So UK does not have a written constitution, whereas South Africa, in fact, in my opinion, Sean, I'll say South Africa is one of the best constitutions in the world, one of the best written constitution in the world. But we have this separation of powers, meaning we've got the law itself, which is written, we've got the executive or the government, and we've got the courts. And my argument is that although we have this nicely well-crafted laws, for me, the constitution, it is not self-executing. It can't, provide service delivery. It can't change cannabis laws. It can't provide textbooks to public schools. Those laws can't do anything. It's the people who must execute this law and through it and put it into manifestation. And it all goes down to the people, which basically the executive, the government, the people running the country. It all boils down to that, in my opinion.
Thank you very much. That's a perfect note to end on, because this is what interests me so much about South Africa is the strength of its constitution and how it allows the people to say they want change. Their issue is always then forcing those in government, as you say, the executive, to actually enact that change through voting in the House, and then making government departments actually do what the legislation says. So I think we've driven to the nub of the issue, and I hear it over and over again with regard to cannabis. And the people have to start. It seems there's a lot of people thinking about it and trying to force the changes. Is just getting government to move on the issue.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, that has always been the problem, Sean.
Well, look, thank you very much for joining us on the Karma Koala podcast. Thato is also at our conference between the 25th and the 27th of June, Cape Town University. If you happen to be in Cape Town or in South Africa and want to hear a lot of people talking about these issues and how South Africa has the tools to have an intellectual debate and actually create change, I think could be a global leader to this effect, do come and join us. Thank you very much for listening to the Karma Koala podcast.
Live and direct, live and I take no jive.
Legalize it. So how much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear. Koala bear. Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, great, Barry, a reefer.